The Who, it's all about identity, who are you, who I am. What's the story of the book? When did you start writing? I know it had quite a long birth process. When did you start writing it? And why did you start writing it?
I started it in '96, and the process was simply going through childhood stuff, looking back, because of course I started with my childhood, and in fact I started before that. I started in a traditional memoir manner, finding out stuff about my grandparents and my great-great-parents and where my family had grown up, and doing that thing of looking into birth certificates and doing that journey. Very interesting thing to do is to find out about where you grew and where you grew up and where you came from. And one fabulous coincidence was that my father's mum and dad lived in Wellock Road in Turnham Green when they were young, before my father was born. Literally one street away from where I went to do my first audition with Roger Daltrey, where he lived in his house there. Literally another 2 steps and you were at John Entwistle's house. So that neighbourhood in Acton, South Acton, was not just where the Who began, but where I began, in a sense.
Right.
And that's that kind of stuff I started with. But then what actually started to happen is I loved writing about my early days when my dad was in a band. I was a little baby in the band bus and handing out bottles of beer to Scottish brass players. And, hey, Cliff, this boy is a great boy. Because I would give him a fucking beer. Bring him again. And yeah, it's interesting. One of the trumpet players was one of the founders of British Alcoholics Anonymous. One day my mum said to me, because I got my mother into AA, and she fucking needed it, but I got into AA. Anyway, I'll try not to swear. Well, I got my mother. Yeah. I put her in the book is that I put her into rehab. Where do you think she went after that? She used to send me AA literature, which I used to kind of throw it all over the place. And anyway, she was a young woman, and she was in the band, and when I started to talk to her about, you're going to need to do rehab. This is after my dad's death, and she produced this photo of her with this guy, Freddie Clayton, Scottish trumpet player, with one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, the famous American Bill W. And there he was with my mother. And I said to her something like, "You didn't really get the message, did you?" And of course, later on, I didn't get the message either. But anyway, I started that way. And so I wrote about those happy times. And then I had to write about the less happy times. I went to live with my grandmother. My mum and dad split up. I only found this later. It was a mystery to me. I went to stay with this grandmother of mine, my mother's mother. There's a long line of gypsies and tinkers and wasters and assholes in her life. I couldn't remember anything. So I decided that what I had to do was to sit my mother down and ask her what had happened in these 2 years from when I was 4.5 to 6.5. And it took me some time. I put a machine in front of her, a little tape machine, and I said to her, "Tell me what happened." And she would say, "Do you want a cup of tea?" And I said, "No, tell me what happened." "Something to eat." Anyway, after a time, she told me the story, and once I'd filled in that part of my missing life as a child, I was able to proceed and continue through the book. It was tough for her to tell me because she didn't come out looking very good. She was a young, glamorous girl. She was a singer. in my dad's first band. He was a glamorous saxophone player. They got together, and then what actually happened is that my dad's band took off after the war. So by 1946, 47, I'm 1, 2, 3 years old. He's in this band that is, gigging all over Europe and all over the UK. And she was beautiful and young and bored with the war and wanted to wear fancy clothes, and she found a British oil man who adopted her and then became her lover, and she became pregnant by this guy 5 times and had abortions. And anyway, so once I got that bit in, I could continue through the book. And then I put the book down. I delivered the first chunk of it. People would say to me, you'll find it very hard to write about your childhood, but I loved writing it. And it was a part. What was interesting for me was when it was good, really, really good, really, really bad, and then really, really good again when I got home. And
so that's the dark period, almost the darkest period of your book.
Yeah, the darkest period of my life was then. And since then, I've remembered a lot more about that time, and I write about that later in the book.
One of the fantastic early moments in the book is when you're talking about that kind of hearing that mysterious music. And almost like the music of the spheres, that you didn't understand what it was. You were on a boat, right, or you were by the water. Explain that, and then let us know how many times you heard that in your life, and if you still do.
Let me just ask, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good, yeah, because yesterday I did a thing in a bookshop and I got some emails to say that people couldn't hear what I was saying. I think they probably just can't understand what I was saying. It's a tricky British accent, yeah.
What accent?
So the thing is, you see, what you got to realise, you see.
Hey, Jack.
The music.
Yeah. I was just thinking about where to start, because the first time it happened to me, of course, was when I was very little. I used to hear it all the time, but I didn't know. I used to think I was hearing the birds. I used to wake up in the morning and hear all this tweeting, and I thought it was birds, but I used to hear music all the time when I was a little kid. Or I would think it was my dad rehearsing his clarinet downstairs or whatever it was. But then one day I put it together because my dad's aunt, Trill, my great aunt Trill, was the only person in the family that had a piano, and I used to go and see her, and she was a lovely, eccentric, new age kind of lady, used to read the tarot and do astrology and all that kind of stuff, and I used to go in and bang at her out of tune piano until I went into a trance. And one day I was banging away at this piano and hearing all this amazing sound, and she was sitting knitting or doing tapestry or something, and I finished, and this big orchestral thing finished, and I kind of turned to her and she said, "That was really wonderful." And I went, "I know." And so she's my great angel. She was the first. A series of...
She encouraged me.
Yeah, a series of wonderful, wonderful, nurturing women in my life, all the way through. The big ones, the best ones are all the women. And I say that because my grandmother I give very bad press to. But she was just fantastic, absolutely fantastic woman. And another one later was my primary school teacher, who would turn I would come in and I'd say, "Hey, I've just discovered there's a piano with 1,000,000 keys." And some kid would kind of go, "You're such a liar." I kind of go, no, really, it's possible. And she realised that I had this incredible this is my primary school teacher. I'm 8, 6, 7, 8, 9, that kind of age. When I came back from my grandma, a woman called Miss Catling, I talk about her in the book, and I think she may have been gay, I don't know, I don't think she ever married, but she was just such a great woman, and she used to encourage me to use my imagination to create stories, and I would sit and put me in front of the class on a Friday afternoon and I would tell stories. I had this wonderful technique. If a story, a plot line got too complicated, I would drop a nuclear bomb. And then Jimmy came back and, he'd lost the stuff that he'd stolen from the store, and then the police had him arraigned, and then a nuclear bomb.
It's a bit like a kind of a very destructive version of Then I Woke Up.
I woke up, a dream within a dream. But the next time that I had this kind of experience that I remember and I write about, because it went on constantly, was I was keen to be a member of the Boy Scouts. I wanted to dress as a sailor. I did. I liked this sailor. They had these little, the Sea Scouts, kind of like the naval cadets with little kind of sailor outfits. And my best friend was in the Sea Scouts, and we went on this bunkhouse weekend. And to cut a long story short, I go on the river, I go past this house that it so happened I was born in. I'm on this boat, I was born in this house. I didn't know I was born there. I'm going past this house that I was born in a boat with an outboard motor, and I started to hear the most fantastic music. I went into a trance, and these two perverts pulled me out of the boat and put me in a cold shower. They stripped me naked, they put me in a cold shower, and they should be doing 60 years in jail, but they won't. So, you know, so for me, that conjunction was really serious shit. You know, I went from this place where I was hearing this fantastic music, and suddenly I wake up in a cold shower with two weirdos doing their stuff. And, you know, for me, I chased that sound constantly, and you know, I did hear it often in my work. You know, I would do working on it. You know, Barbara O'Reilly, in a sense, is an indication of how it could go in my head, but it would be much better what I would hear. And I fortunately don't get it anymore.
Is it always, well, it's kind of a musician question, but is it always disappointing what you finally get after what you heard in your head?
No.
Or have there been moments, or are there specific bits where you can go, that's not only what I heard, it's actually a little bit better than what
I'd go further as a musician. I would say that when a musician is performing, I don't know whether you'll agree, and we call it going into the zone. You know, you'll be playing, and then suddenly you'll not be playing, but music will still be playing. And they say your fingers are playing, but you actually go on to another level and you hear different stuff. You know, you're not hearing what you're playing, you're hearing something else. And I have to say too, that you guys in an audience, and me, if I happen to be with you guys in an audience, God, it's awful. If I have to be out there with you guys. Anyway. No, but if I'm in an audience and I'm listening to music, sometimes we as an audience go into the zone as well. You know, we start to hear a different thing. So I think that's what it is. It was me, in a sense, being in the zone and coming down.
Right.
And so, yeah.
But then, so there you're talking specifically about playing live, but what about a studio version of something that you've heard in your head? Does
That would depend how much brandy I'd drunk.
Say not very much. But also, so you, what I really liked in the book was not that I thought any different about you, but the massively varied sources of your musical inspirations.
Yeah.
Jazz stuff, classical stuff, because you were at art school and you're perhaps hearing things that, you know, Roger wasn't hearing at the same time.
I undoubtedly was. Yeah.
Well, just tell us two of
He was hearing bang, 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 bang.
I thought that was Keith Moon that you were doing. Do you think, was there, just tell us one of those weirder bits of music that, you know, maybe we don't all know about, classical music or whatever, that was massively influential on you at those times?
You're talking about art school years, early days of the
Any time,
Well,
just
you know,
something that really comes from left field, that is
yeah.
now part of the rock music canon because you've made it so.
I don't know that much of that stuff did become part of the rock music canon, although there are people who I've touched, like Brian Eno, like David Bowie, who have gone off and gone into deep experimentation. You know, both of those guys did the same art school course that I did. I don't know whether you know that. I did a course called the Basic Course. It was a revival of the Bauhaus course, which was cut out of the British art school system because it was German. And so it wasn't brought back again until the early 60s. And I did it first. David Bowie did it next, and Brian Eno followed on. And in those days, it wasn't that one looked at, say, artists like Archie Shepp, whose idea of a saxophone solo was
And a man.
or Sun Ra, who would take a kind of a Duke Ellington song and then turn it into kind of strange, weird, bizarre electric organ music. Those cats were the guys that I was listening to. Because, at Arts College we had this extraordinary guy, I think he was probably the first really serious gay New Yorker that I've ever met, a painter, action painter called Larry Rivers. And he was a jazz saxophone player. He was an incredible raconteur. He was a free painter in the style of Jackson Pollock. He just threw paint at the canvas, and he managed to get 2 Jackson Pollock paintings that he owned, that Jackson Pollock had given to him, into our school corridor. They're probably worth $20 million now. But, and he used to take me aside and talk to me, and it was. So it wasn't so much about what I was able to bring to the band or to bring to the world or to bring to music, but just the way that, in a sense, the way that I approached what I did changed. And I do think that the other guys in the band, Roger was not so rigid and working class, and that banging was him working in his steel factory. He worked in he made cabinets and was always coming with gashed hands and stuff. And it wasn't that they were too kind of out of the art. It was that they just left it to me. And they did allow me to influence them. If I hadn't have brought R&B records from Art College into our campus, Roger still sings a lot of Johnny Cash songs. That's kind of what he wanted to do. I'm quite serious.
Yeah.
And there was certainly nothing wrong with it. He does a very good imitation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Archie Shepp, one of my favourite quotes is he said, "Every solo I do is 2 fingers at society," which is a great quote that, something you could have said also, I think.
I suppose so, yeah. And certainly I knew what he said. There was a record label, an avant-garde record label in 1964. It's called, oh God, I'm going to forget it now. The first Sun Ra album I got was called The Heliocentric Worlds of Sun Ra.
Yes.
That's it, yeah.
And but also your art school influence. There's a bit at the beginning of the book when you talk about smashing your guitar, like you're doing a sculpture for the audience, like what you're doing is a sculpture. That's got to be an art school influence.
That's
as well,
right, yeah. And I get irritated if that's dismissed.
Right.
But I have to live with it. It did become a kind of gimmick. It did become something that, and it became something other than I intended. But the whole point of everything that I did on the stage was I wanted to do something so that the audience that was in front of me would find some sense of release, some sense of connection, some sense of purpose, some sense that I could be a part of stimulating, re-stimulating these young men that we performed to who were not willing to do what the older guys were doing. The older guys would dress in smart suits, they would come to a club, they would look for the prettiest girl, they would try to take her home, the object would be to kiss her, to have sex with her, to marry her, and then go and work in a bank. That was that. And those were the guys that were maybe 4, 5, 6 years older than we were. The audience that we played to were young men from between 14 to 17 years old who just would come in desert boots, Levi's, and a t-shirt, and they would have no idea what they were going to do in the future, no idea of what their function would be. And it wasn't that I wanted to give them a job, I just wanted to make them feel that there would be some place for them in the world ahead. Because we all felt that there wouldn't be a place. We didn't understand where we were going to go, where we were going to fit in. We were really seriously, honestly disenfranchised.
In the post-war?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, not in the post-war.
No, but in the...
But that little clique of people that were born from 1945 to 1950, we didn't know what we were going to do. So the music was really vital.
So you're smashing guitars, you're sculpting guitars. Art is expensive. How many of those guitars are you picking up, mending, and playing the next night?
That happened later. I started...
Were they played?
No. I started...
But you'd have them and then smash them again?
No.
Well, why did you mend them?
I'm an artist. Let me explain. I used Rickenbackers, and I got through about 10 of them. They cost the equivalent in today's money of about $15,000. So by the time I was 19, I was pretty seriously in debt. So I switched to a guitar that was a little bit tougher. I went from playing Rickenbackers, which I could actually break on my hip, which is this fabulous move. Do you mind if I do it for you?
Oh, please.
I just kind of go like that. Boom.
Woo!
Boom. And one day, it just split in two. I've got two bits of guitar. So I moved to a different kind of... I loved Rickenbackers, I loved the sound of them, I've still got a few, I love them, they're a fantastic instrument, but I went to something much tougher and I started to play Fenders, Telecasters and Stratocasters. And they're pretty hard to break. In fact, I can remember the first time I tried to break one, I couldn't do it, and I thought, because I'd been so light with it, I thought, not really wanting it to break. I'm so savage and anarchic, and I hope it doesn't really break. It's another $15,000. And in the end, realised that I could really bang the Fender Stratocaster, and then pick it up and then continue to play, and it would still be in tune. And if I did break it, I could put it back together again. In fact, our first set of shows in New York were in '67 at the Murray the K show. And we were doing 4, 5, 6 shows a day sometime, and every show I broke the guitar, and every time I broke it, I had an hour and a half to repair it and put it back together again. I am a luthier.
And so I
make musical instruments.
And it was playable?
Yeah.
But surely there's a moment when you break the neck of a guitar where it's not coming back for seconds.
No, not really, no. If you've got enough left, you can spline it in together.
You've got a very short neck.
Literally, no, you take off you skim off the fingerboard and you put the neck back together. Use very, very fast drying glue. I used to use this powder glue. No, I think they would dry in sometimes it wouldn't work. Who cared? We were smashing guitars on the Murray the K show. Most of the people in the audience were 4.5 years old. They must be, because I've met about 50 of them. They still look about 4.5. So no, I mean, there were it was a young audience that came and spent the whole day there. They weren't that young, they were 12, 13, 14, 15.
I don't want to spend all our time, the chatting portion must end fairly soon, but just talk about, a quick one, Tommy, the urge to Quadrophenia, Iron Man, urge to tell a big story with a piece of music that really no one had done, before you in the rock world. You kind of invented that. And it's been something that, you're known for. And obviously, Tommy and Quadrophenia have had afterlives in different media, as it were, and on different platforms. And then you have a new thing called Floss that you mention at the end of your book. Just tell us something about how you feel about that so important development of your work.
I think because I felt always that what I was doing was writing songs for the audience. And I think because I was a member of the band, I was very conscious that I also had to write songs that the band could play as well as they could play for the audience. That became a craft that I found that was quite constricting. And I had this studio in Wardour Street in an old film editing cutting room. And it was very early days. It was 1966. The Who were still on a roll of hit singles. That's what we were doing. We hadn't broken America. We were on UK TV and going and trying to find shows where girls would scream at us. But, they never did. But anyway, that kind of pop star kind of thing that we were doing. And I went in and one day and I decided that I wanted to write something, a proper opera, a real opera. So I learned how to orchestrate. I studied orchestrations. I spent six or 7 weeks doing work. I listened to opera. I studied the scores. And I began to write this piece, a story. It was based on a visit that I'd made to Israel just before the conflict with Egypt, the very, very first conflict with Egypt, called Rael. And the story was Israel going to war with Red China. And I got about 14 or 15 pieces of music. I'd call it extramural. You know what I mean? I was still writing songs for The Who. This was something I was doing on the side for when The Who stopped getting hits, which was about to happen. And what actually happened was that Kit Lambert came in one day, The Who's manager and our record producer, and says, "What have you got?" And I said, "Well, I haven't got anything." And he said, "Well, what are you working on?" And I said, I haven't got anything I'm working on. He says, "What's this stuff over here?" And I said, "That's my opera." And he said, "Pete, you've written an opera. That's jolly good. Well, let's have that then." And, well, yeah, maybe. But, that's right. Constant Lambert was the director of the Royal Opera House in the 50s. But anyway, he took my... This was going to be like a 3-hour Wagnerian, maybe even a 3-year Wagnerian cycle. Israel is at war with Red China, and we got it down to a 6-minute single. And we recorded it at a studio in New York with Al Cooper playing organ on it, and a very, very short piece. In fact, I'm going to premiere it at next year's Teenage Cancer concert in London in March with a full orchestra, the 7-minute mini opera. But then I went on to do another one. I went on to do one called A Quick One While He's Away, which came about in exactly the same way. We had a hole in an album, we needed to fill it. I'd written 3, 4, 5, 6 songs which were unfinished, and Kit came and said, "We need some 6 songs, no, we need to fill up 7 minutes gap on this album that we've got." And suggested that I string these songs together, and that's how A Quick One happened. It was a natural development to go into Tommy. Let me say something about why it worked for me. I was talking about writing songs for those boys, trying to write songs that made them laugh, that gave them hope, that made them feel that there was something that we together could grapple, that was maybe higher than, just going and working in a factory or being a runner. And of course all this stuff led to Jimmy in Quadrophenia. That boy in Quadrophenia was the boy that was out there in the audience. It's kind of a simulacrum for all of those kids. I suddenly realised with those other little pieces that I'd done that the narrative behind had another function, which is that you tell a story and then you don't finish it. You kind of, but you don't drop the nuclear bomb. You just say, listen, the kid, at the end, for example, at the end of A Quick One While He's Away, this story unfolds. It appears to be a very, very silly story. I analyse it in my book. It's probably my story, I think, as a child. But it ends with forgiveness, just forgiveness. But you don't really know who's forgiving who. I leave that to you. You decide who you're forgiving. You decide, you know what I'm saying? So I felt that with this narrative, and it happens in Tommy as well. You get to the end of Tommy and you think, what's happened? He's climbed a mountain, but what happens? At the end of Quadrophenia, he goes out to the rock, he sings Love Rain on Me, but then what happens? He's on a fucking rock in the middle of the ocean.
How about the end of Floss?
The end of Floss is it will happen at the show.